today's episode, Aperture and what is it? So what is aperture? An opening, hole, or gap, a space through which light passes in an optical or photographic instrument, the variable opening in which light enters a camera. Okay, seriously, English please? Aperture is how much light or lack of light is let into the camera from the lens. Aperture also has to do with what your f-stop number is. Aperture numbers and f-stops. On your camera you may notice numbers such as f8, f5.6, etc. Those numbers are your f-stop, which control your aperture. Each number has an important role for how you want your picture's depth of field to turn out. F-stop numbers and meanings. Understanding the aperture numbers in terms of an f-stop is really simple. The smaller the number, an example being f2.8, the less depth of field you have. The bigger the number, example f22, the more depth of field you have. Now you may be asking, what's depth of field? Depth of field is what is in focus and what is not in focus in your photo. Uh-oh, review time. Bet you didn't see that one coming. So, what do we know now? Number one, what is aperture? Aperture is the amount of light the lens lets into the camera. Number two, the numbers. They are the f-stop which control the aperture. Number three, what do the numbers mean? The smaller the f-stop, the less depth of field. The bigger the f-stop, the more depth of field. Number four, what is depth of field? It's the amount of in-focus and not in-focus parts of a photo. Got it? Hope so. Picture time! Alright, so as you can see in this photo, it was taken at f2.8, which has an extremely shallow depth of field. I use good old markers with different colors to show you the ranges of depth of field. So right now I'm focusing on the red marker. As you can see, the red marker and parts of the orange marker are in focus, but once you get to the yellow marker and so on with the other colors, the rest of the photo becomes blurrier out of focus. That's your depth of field. So right now, since I'm shooting with a big aperture, letting a lot of light into the camera, I'm going to have a shallower depth of field. Moving up to f8, as you can see, there's more detail in the photo, but the focus still falls off. Focusing once again on the red marker, the orange and yellow are pretty much in focus, but once you get to the green, you can see it starts to get blurry, as well as the rest of the photo does, the more the focus goes back. So this is an example of when you move the aperture up, you're letting less light into the camera, which also allows for a greater depth of field. Now to f16. As you can see, even start of the blue marker starts to get more in focus. Now, for landscape photography in particular, f16 is always considered the magic number to get the most in focus. Now, there are other apertures, even higher, such as f22, even up to f32, and if you're using different types of film, you can sometimes go higher than that. So, if you're using landscape especially, you want a higher f-stop to get more of the scene in focus. But once again, this will let less light into the camera, which means you may be at a slower shutter speed, so make sure you're using a tripod the higher f number you get. Now here's an example of a very shallow depth of field. This is shot with a Canon 50mm 1.2, and they also make an 85mm 1.2, which are what they consider to be the premier portrait lenses. Now at an aperture of f1.2, it's very good for night photography or really low light situations. However, when you're shooting at an aperture that small, you want to make sure that your focus is spot on. Otherwise, what you're wanting or intending to focus on may not be exactly what you focus on. Most standard lenses come usually with an aperture of f2.8 in the semi-pro series lenses. If you're a beginner, you may have an aperture of 3.5 to 5.6, somewhere in that range. That's totally okay and fine. You can still get a shallow depth of field and the perfect image that you may want. Cool camera, zoom in effect, do. Alright, so as you can see, we're on live view recording with a camera, 50mm at 1.2. Now, as you can see in the photo, if I were to take it right now, it would be pretty overexposed. And so how do you change that? Well, you can do that either by the shutter speed or by the aperture. So right now I'll show you how we do that with the aperture. Right now we're at f1.2 on a 50mm lens, and so by simply turning up the aperture, the photo will get darker because the camera allows less light to get in, so forth and so on. So as you can see, that's how you can simply change the brightness or darkness of a photo and also change the depth of field. So once again, I hope you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for shutter speed, which we will then combine in a video after that to get the proper exposure on a photo.